the things in a small district in Bullitt County, which is Statesboro, Georgia. If anyone's familiar with Georgia Southern University, that's where we are. And I really enjoyed hearing what you're looking forward to. We love to do rows, thorns, and growth buds. And sometimes when we have our district meetings to say what's working well for you, what challenges are your thorns that you're struggling with, and then what are those buds that you're looking forward to. So I really enjoy getting to hear some of the things that you're looking forward to. And I know that I'm not going to answer all of your questions, and I do not know that I know I do not have all the answers either, but you're in really great hands because I do know Stephen and Crystal Cherasani, who supports you, and they supported us in Georgia for a while as well. And so I am just thrilled to be here as a part of anything. They're a part of that team. I'm also going to have my video off because I want to make sure the bandwidth is protected. But if you need anything, please don't hesitate to put in the chat. We'll have opportunities to talk and to discuss it. But just for the purpose of today, let's start with the objectives. So you see the three main bullets today. Again, just a piece of these things. I love to say that we are not CEOs in our district work. We are CCOs, the Chief Communicating Officer. So it is our job to really communicate how to work with behavior and how to help our districts and schools grow in those areas. And so these are the three things. We're going to look at some of the components of the model for implementing MTSS-B. We're going to summarize some of the evidence, and we're going to describe some examples of how you can support the implementation of this in your districts as well. If you want to go ahead and move on, Catherine. I had not seen this model. Again, Georgia does something called the Georgia MTSS, but it is so very similar. But I love in your model how you have it, the middle leadership teaming, and how it's really the center that should work around all of the pieces to make great fidelity. Awesome, Matt. I see you like that too, because all these things do have a role in effective implementation, but the center does start with making sure you have the right people at the table, looking at your data and making those informed decisions to support your teams. All right, Catherine. Up, and there you are. There you go. There's your role in that. Thank you. So here for the evidence for the MTSS-B, again, I love how your state is looking at the 5 critical areas that you have to have. And we know what a critical role district leadership plays in implementation. And we also know that districts must establish a system-wide expectation and then provide that coaching to sustain for sustainability, for buy-in, and just for building capacity in those areas. That is research-based. We also know that coaching and development of your professional staff is required and to make it more effective. So it will increase the likelihood of that long-term success. And you'll hear me say later on that database decision-making, that again is in the heart of the work that you do. So we really want to track the effectiveness, identify areas for improvement, and we do that by looking at your data every time you meet. And we look at that data in not only just behavior, but in a well-rounded format to make sure we're making decisions that will adjust to all the practices you have. The fourth one, the funding and resource allocation, I'm not going to talk as much on that today, but just know that that is a part of district leadership. You have to have someone on your team that can make sure these things happen, whether it's PL, whether it's staffing or funding, any resources you need for your progress monitoring. Someone has to be on your team that can make those decisions and make sure you are allocating the funds needed. And then the last part, of course, is integrating. I just alluded earlier that we know that when you experience behavior symptoms in situations, that they don't work in a silo. You also have to look at the well-being and the academic outcomes for the whole experience, and it's going to work better when you do that. All right, Catherine, if you'll move on. And if there's any questions for any of those, I think they're going to be covering this throughout your ECHO series. And yes, I think you will also get the slide deck. Great question. But I wanted to start with the basics. Some of this, I'm sure, is a great review for you all because you're in this work. You see this every day. But again, as that chief reminding officer or as the chief communication officer, we need to make sure everyone is on the same page, speaking the same language, and that we have the foundational or tier one and core beliefs that all communication, all behavior is a form of communication. We know a lot of times students may not have the skills or the language to tell us what they need. So often they show us what they need. So when you probably are familiar with this iceberg, that you only see the tip of the behavior. And when a student acts out or shuts down or avoids task or whatever's happening, they're not really being just difficult. They're trying to meet an unmet need, and usually in the best way that they know how or that has gotten reinforcement in the past. So look at the bottom of that, and you can kind of put in the chat, if you will, what are some things, other things that you may see that behavior might be communicating that we might not even be aware of. Some students may not ever even tell you the trauma or the situations that are causing it, but their behavior again may experience that. So maybe you have seen students with a need to escape something. Thank you. I see someone said hunger, food instability, housing instability. Maybe someone needs attention, whether it's positive or negative. They are reaching out to find a connection. There's all kinds of things that can be under the iceberg. Grief, absolutely. Thank you. Wonderful. Yes, this fits not only our most vulnerable students, but all students. We know that we have a lot to unpack. So when we shift our mindset from what's wrong with the student to what is the student trying to tell me, then we can often move toward empathy, understanding, and what's really important, more effective intervention. So I like to say, see the need behind the deed. And we also know that what may be visible, the problem behavior, can also look in different ways. So again, think about some behaviors you may see. Maybe it's sleeping in class that's caused by that hunger or that home instability. Maybe it's defiance. Maybe it's disruptive behavior. Whatever we see at the top, if we only respond to that, we miss the root of the need. So go ahead, Catherine, if you will, and let's move on to the next visual that I love. This is something I love to give teachers at the beginning of the year and our staff and our leaders, to ask them to just remind teachers to put a Q-tip on their desk. And remember, most of the time, it's not about them personally. It's about what's going on with the student. And so that Q-tip can just remind them that instead of they're giving me a hard time, maybe they're having a hard time. And how can I intervene and make those connections and collect them? Because we also know that where your attention goes, your energy flows. And we're going to get more of what we focus on. So if we focus on teaching grounding techniques, mindfulness, relationship building, connections, the positive things, we're going to get more of those things. So go ahead, Catherine. I love this analogy. I taught elementary school and I was a school counselor in elementary school before moving to an alternative school. So what a difference I saw from elementary, middle, and high. But what was the same was that we needed to teach students to create a pause, to create a space between what happens and their response to that, what happens. We want to teach students and teachers to stop with the red light, think with the yellow light, pause to make that decision, and then make good choices with the green light. So we create that space between the event or trigger and the response and action. And this again is where we can teach those skills like SEL, mindfulness, de-escalation, coping, regulation, but we need to do this when they are calm. And then this way they are able to use those tools in times that they need it. But what you're seeing on the screen is also for teachers to use that traffic light analogy of the teachers and your staff and leaders need to stop and observe, what is it that I'm seeing? Pause to consider what could be going on or what could be the antecedent, and then how can I meet their need? What are they trying to communicate? So again, these are just some chief reminding officer responsibilities that we need to make sure all of our staff, starting with our leaders, understand the nature of behavior. All right, Catherine. The next graphic will show, and you can go ahead and click the next one as well. It shows how in Georgia, this is one of our Georgia Department of Ed pyramids of intervention. I know y'all have heard it. We've called it tiers of intervention, RTI, SST, all the different acronyms, ABC. But in a lot of schools that I work with and have been involved in, our pyramid was flipped. We had 80% of students sometimes off task or doing, or maybe not attending, or all kind of different things behaviorally and academics. And if that's the case, we really need to move from the focus on just those students who need that tier 2 and tier 3 to tier 1, high quality instruction and supports for all. So we know we will always need those tier 2 and tier 3 supports. We will always have students that have different needs. And I'd like to say interventions are tiered, not our students, because a student who is gifted and talented may also have an attendance need or a behavior need or a well-being need. So it doesn't, we're not just lumping them and labeling them in one tier, but that could be fluid and flexible. So we want to know, how can we build stronger universal supports for all students that will then prevent, hopefully, some of that upside down pyramid that we often see. All right, Catherine, so that should have been just a quick review that I know you probably have already heard, but here's really the meat of where I like to start with connections matter. And this is so true that I think we are all plugged into many things, but connections to your staff, to your students, connecting our work to our district improvement plan, to our goals, and connecting our information to the data and outcomes that we see. This is all critical in making sure that we have a well-rounded and an effective district support for MTSS. And you've heard the saying, I'm sure, that says, people don't care what you know until they know that you care. That is with leaders too in our district. Thank you, Karen. You're so right. Our language is important. How we say, what we say, our tone of voice, our body language, all these things convey a message. Do we care? Are we trying to build that relationship? Because that's foundational. That's the core where everything else will build upon that strong foundation. So for your district leaders and for ourselves, when I was a district leader, the first thing I want to do is make sure I learn the name of every one of my MTSS coaches, whether they're PBIS or well-being, my counselors, my social workers. I want to learn their names, speak their names, go visit them and just listen. Just really ask them, what are you seeing? Using that rose, thorn, and bud, prompts if you need to say, what's really working well for you? What are you struggling with? And what are you looking forward to as we continue to move? And you've already modeled what a great job you're doing in South Carolina doing that. You also, though, want to provide that positive feedback, and that's so critical because I've had many evaluators and leaders that would come and observe, and then I just get a sheet of paper and says, great job, there you go. But not really that constructive criticism or constructive feedback of how I can grow and what specifically they did like, that specific feedback, or even some of the ways of saying, I wonder if you have looked at this or tried this, or have you thought of this? Are just excellent ways how you can connect first to your staff and model for them to connect with their staff and their students to build on this. I also had a note in here just to tell you that if you haven't ever looked at the 7 habits of highly effective people with your own district teams, it's such a good reminder of just how we want to connect on that foundational level with everyone. So I love just to put that in. It's an oldie, but a goodie. All right, so you can head on and to the next slide where we're going to be talking about connecting your MTSS behavior with your district and school improvement plans. Maybe you're already doing this. I hope so, because I know it's one of those most effective and instrumental pieces that will align what you're doing and not just be siloed out there by yourself. as a former counselor, a lot of times when the student misbehaved, they just wanted to call the counselor and say, here, you help this student and bring them back when they're well behaved. But we're missing the point if we're not including everyone on that with us. So in this step of effective district support, we want to make sure that whatever goals for behavior that you're working on in your district and at your schools are aligned with your district and school improvement plans at your district and school level. So that may be some examples. Maybe most people have somewhere in your district goal or your school improvement plan to have a safe and positive school learning environment. Maybe your goal is to reduce the disparities in discipline practices, or maybe you're trying to strengthen that family community partnership. I know in Bullitt County, one of ours was preparing college and career-ready citizens. So we know school is the job of our students, and it's a practice for either enrolling in a college, enlisting in a service, or being employed, those 3 E's. So we want to teach those employability skills and things that can help them in that. So if that's your district improvement goal, your behavior strategy should be aligned with that. So in the chat, or if you want to unmute, can someone just share with us something that's currently in your district goal that is already related to behavior? Looking in the chat to see, but maybe you need to be more familiar. If you're not familiar, that'd be a great first step. So maybe that's something that you can look at. What is your data showing? First of all, like if your data is showing attendance, thank you, or vaping, or not passing course completion for the high school, and it might be due to some behavior out of school suspension or in school suspension or things like that, then you use that data to create a goal that then will support the work you do. Thank you for being vulnerable in your honesty that you're still looking at some of these things. And I see that Rob did share that their goal is to increase the percentage of parents and teachers satisfied with the social and physical environment. And I think that does relate because you want to have that safe, consistent, predictable, positive environment. And that comes from having the structure and the behavior foundation built in, right, in your climate and culture. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. All right, let's move on, please. Catherine, thank you. So the next one is the strategic teaming for our districts and schools. Again, we know that this is very important because we are focusing on integrating your MTSS behavior in your schools and in your teams. So when I say integrate, at Georgia, we're trying to do an alignment between behavior, well-being, and academics. So maybe you're already doing fidelity checks for safety. How many doors are locked? How many kids are wearing their lanyards? Could you perhaps add into that? How many greetings at the door are happening? How many kids are engaged? And how many positive to corrective comments are you hearing? So that's what I'm talking about. Whatever you're already doing, just incorporate that into your practices that you're already doing. And thank you, Catherine, for that heads up. So let's move on because I want to get to the meat, which is coming up. So our HLPs, we call high leverage practices, again, for tier 1, all students being proactive. These are the things I just mentioned that we could check for. We could see, we could hear, we could feel it when we walk in the door. These are just some examples. I'm sure you have many more, but the key to me is that connection before content. So we know we can't bloom until we Maslow, until we know that they have their belonging and they are supported and safe, then they're not going to have the content easily accessible. So just be thinking of, and you can write in the chat, how do you currently teach and support high leverage practices in your district and schools? So while y'all are doing that, would you perhaps go ahead and advance that slide because I want to make sure I keep the time. One of the first things in that previous slide had mentioned having clear expectations and a structure and a matrix. So this is just an example. Thank you, Stephen. I do love me some one-liners. I mess them up half the time, but I'm glad you're following them. The sample behavior matrix that I've shown you here is an example for a high school in a classroom. Most schools have like the 3 R's: respectful, ready, responsible, whatever. But up in the top, when you get this, the blue is linked to a whole example of how we can teach this, model it, practice it, reinforce it, and repeat it. And that is critical in making sure that this is done not only in the lunchroom, but at the bus stop, in the classroom, and it's the expectation, the way of the school. We have one school that doesn't call Positive Behavior Intervention Supports PBIS, they call it the Blue Tide Way because they're the Blue Tide school. So however this fits in your current framework, I encourage you to model that just like you did your norms at the beginning. All right, so move on to the next one. Here's some examples of PL. I asked you if you have some examples of what you're doing already, and I see some answers for that, but these are some things that we've done that have seemed to be really helpful. Making sure everyone either has that fundamental positive behavior intervention support. There's a ton of websites out there that you can go to pbs.org that tell you more about that. But the universal classroom supports piece is really powerful because it really talks about that tier 1, how to make sure that that's cohesive and structured so it prevents the upper needs of the tiers a lot of times. Whatever you call your new teachers, when new teachers come in, do you have an induction or a mentoring process, orientation or onboarding? We recommend that you do at the beginning of the year, at the beginning of a semester, after every holiday. Do practices where you put up chairs like you're in a bus and how we enter and exit the bus, how we sit in our seat. You can do simulations in the media center. It doesn't have to be on a bus, but make sure you're including all these people as well because they're the ones who really are the peripheral of the school that make the school climate and culture what it is too. Here's just some other examples. And I know I'm really big on our family connections here in Georgia, a component and advocate for that. I don't know if you have something similar in South Carolina, but it's a collaborative that meets with community partners to talk about what are the needs in our community. So plug into them, connect with them of what they're already doing and share with them. Maybe at your rec department, at games, you can have those same expectations. At a game, we want to be responsible, safe, and ready, or whatever the expectations are. Share it in your community so it becomes part of, again, the way of your school is the way of your community and your parents are aware, etc. All right, so move on and you'll see some of my favorite resources. Again, I am old school because these are some tried and true. But if you have not seen some of these, please take a minute to look into these. Harry Wong is just a classic for structure and first days of school setup. You set up for success. Brian Mindler has a ton of YouTube videos and he's a dynamic speaker. We use Amy Dean. She's from Atlanta, Georgia. She calls herself the behavior queen and she is that. She does some virtual PL that's just down and dirty. I have a picture of some of the books that one of our systems, Glenn County, shared with me that they do for their new teachers. And they use Teach Like a Champion, and they also use Mentoring in Action. So yes, Matt, I'm with you. I still look at it every time. So every beginning of the year, I like to share that with our staff and our leaders to make sure they're sharing it. So here's just some examples that if you weren't familiar with these, check those out. All right, next slide, because I'm sorry I'm flying through this, but I want to get you out so you have questions and feel free to put those in the chat. But I do feel like a lot of this is a review, but this part is also important to make sure that you're monitoring the fidelity of whatever it is you're doing. Are we doing what we say we're doing? And I love this quote. It's since Stephen, you're on my wavelength of the quotes, but you focus on inspect what you expect. How many times have you gone into a classroom and said, oh yeah, we did that PL in the fall and I know they're using it, but you see it up on the shelf and not being used? Because if you're not inspecting it, if you're not in and out of the classes, walkthroughs, if you're not modeling, coaching, having feedback loops, then it's probably not going to be done to the best that it can be done. And I encourage with our districts that we hold monthly meetings for our district MTSS behavior, and we would do it at the different schools. So that team can share that month. It's their time to share their data and do a walkthrough of what's going on. It's great for fresh eyes to see that. Oh, I love that. Thank you guys for adding in the chat some ideas too. And you'll see on the next slide that when I say peer observations, let them go see leaders in whatever area they're struggling with, whether it's academic or behavior, and then let them share out, because you'll get a lot more buy-in if you have in-house experts. All right, so just be thinking about what are you currently doing to measuring fidelity. Maybe during a lunch and learn at a district, you could just walk through and count how many student greetings at the door, how many students were up and moving and engaging in different things. You know, just a very quick check for what we think is important. So you can put some of those in the chat or just be thinking about it. But Catherine, go ahead and move because we're almost done and almost out of time, aren't we? So the last, I saved the last for the best for the last, if I can get that right. And that is to use your data. That is the heart of decision-making, database decision-making. It should guide each meeting, and you should not only look at it where you're at in it, but report that out, share that out. That is where you're going to get, again, that buy-in and that building sustainability and capacity that everybody in your building needs to hear. What is our data looking like? What have we done well? What are we working on this month? If it is the attendance or vaping or whatever, tardies, one of my schools had a no tardy lunch party that I loved, that they used their data and they worked on a lesson plan and they worked on focus on that, and everybody was on board. And at the end of the month, they were able to have a celebration with that data. So this is again where you might bring in your community to share out with them. I don't know if any of you've ever heard of Dr. Jim Finch. He's the superintendent now in Monroe County, but he was a high school principal who's presented at many PBIS conferences. But he had a great social media presence with his high school, where if there were no fights from Monday through Thursday, then on Thursday afternoon, he would put something on social media for families and parents and students to say, great job, Mary Persons High School. Tomorrow you can wear athletic wear, because they knew they're looking at their data and they're holding everybody accountable. So how often are you looking at your data and sharing it? I love that. Thank you, Karen. Everyone in the building needs to hear it. All right, next and last slide, I think, is just the model that is similar to what you've already seen, but how that is the center. Database decision-making is the center, where no matter what you're looking at. And we know that attendance and those things under the iceberg will affect behavior. We know that behavior can affect academics. So it's a whole circle of building the structure and the supports, using your data to make informed decisions. All right, I did a really fast and furious, trying to give you the overview of that. I'll hide my video so I can see and hear. What questions do you have? What stood out for you? What were some aha moments? And if you'll go to the next slide, I think it says, and maybe it's not on that one or not. Let's see, do you have one more slide? My personal action that I sent that to Crystal later. My question was, what will you commit to learn, to review, to practice, or to share out, that we talked about really quickly? Have y'all ever done the 3 A's, aha, affirmation, and action? Like, what's an aha? What's an affirmation that I am doing this and these are great things I need to remember? Or action, what do I need to do? Thank you for sharing, committing about a
Good.
group that the DLT might want to target at the district level for communication. Awesome. When I started at my district, I know that I was siloed. I think I mentioned earlier. And so they would say, okay, let's hear from PBIS. Renee, do your little thing, and then let's go back to the other conversation. And they didn't say little thing, I'm paraphrasing, but having it be embedded in what are you working on for school improvement and how can we build into that? Thank you guys. Taryn, I see a great aha that you're doing things, a lot of things. I know you are, but the fidelity piece will measure that for you. Wonderful. Thank you. Absolutely, Stephen. You're right. We're all in that boat. Thank you, Matt, for your takeaway. Common language. Teresa, you just got a promotion. You're the CCO of your district now.
All right. Thank you, Renee. We really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and getting everyone to participate with you. And if you didn't have a chance to share your personal action, you can still put it there in the chat. It lets the community know what you intend to do. Now we're going to switch gears and move to that problem of practice.